It's amazing to think he can recite all that shit, and I can't remember that myself. Gentlemen, what I want to do this afternoon is to share an old gray-headed flight surgeon's perspectives of the stuff that I learned the hard way that I shouldn't have had to learn the hard way. Somebody should have told me, and they didn't. I'm going to be blunt. I'm going to be earthy. I am known to regularly offend newborn Christians. If you are one, stand by. The credentials that I bring that allow me to say what I'm going to say and the way I'm going to say it is that I have gray hair to look old, and I have a mustache to look mature, and I have hemorrhoids to look serious. And that's all the hell it takes. I'd like to remind you of what it is that you're fooling with by quoting somebody who you probably remember very well but have forgotten. Harry Reasoner. You remember this? About a helicopter? The thing is, helicopters are different from planes. An airplane by its nature wants to fly, and if not interfered with too strongly by unusual events or by a deliberately incompetent pilot, it will fly. A helicopter does not want to fly. It is maintained in the air by a variety of forces and controls working in opposition to each other. And if there is any disturbance in this delicate balance, the helicopter stops flying immediately and disastrously. There is no such thing as a gliding helicopter. This is why being a helicopter pilot is so different from being an airplane pilot, and why, in general, airplane pilots are open, clear-eyed, buoyant extroverts, and helicopter pilots are brooders, introspective anticipators of trouble. They know if something bad has not happened, it is about to. Well, is Harry Reasoner right? No, he's not. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do this afternoon, I'm sorry I didn't bring my A6 tail hook and put it up here because it sort of sets out where am I coming from. If I use the Navy tail hook aviator, who the civilian thinks is some magical, crazy, wild man, lucky person, and that this, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10 adventurer, that those of us who are not so endowed must possess something of what he has, perhaps maybe a 9 or an 8 or a 4.5 or a 3. And I want to show you that whether they are wing-wearing aviators who fly machines that beat the air into submission in order to remain airborne, or whether in fact it's fixed wing and it's got a tail hook and it looks like hell and it's fancy and it's sexy and it draws a sexy type of person, but nevertheless, all these people possess some things that you as commanders will recognize in yourselves. And as a matter of fact, I will not tell you anything you don't know. All I will do is sort of put it together for you and give you a yardstick to apply against the people who work for you. If I were to say that I'm just talking about aviators, this is incorrect. I'm talking about professionals. Now, we find professionals in our business starting about E4 and E5. They're still working on it, but they're getting there. As the E4 and E5 matures and gets older, certainly by the time he's 25 years of age, what I'm going to describe this afternoon under the guise of the aviator is somebody who, though they aren't aviators, they are. This is what we are all made of if we are professionals. Now, the difference in aviation is key. For instance, nobody would challenge me that neurosurgeons are professionals. But if a neurosurgeon screws up, who pays? It is not the neurosurgeon. Okay, the engineer that designed the big auditorium in Hartford, Connecticut that fell in on the weight of the snow on its roof 2.5 years ago, who paid for that? It was not the engineer. In the business that you and I are in, when you screw up, who pays? You do. See, now that's unique. That is a magnet that draws a select crowd of people who like that. And I will show you that there are very unique characteristics to these. Now, I'm going to use my A6 tail hook as the 10 on the scale. But you watch how close you are to the scale. I asked a group of naval aviators 4 questions a short while ago. The purpose for asking the question was to identify how select is the group. Try the same 4 questions on you, show you what the answers are in the community at large, and let's see just what kind of a self-selective group this is. Number 1. If you are to stop the first 100 males on the street in Dothan, Alabama, and ascertain how many are oldest sons. 1 out of 3, statistically, will be the oldest son. In this room, would you give me a show of hands as to how many of your oldest sons besides me? Okay, hold your hands up. Would everybody look around, please? Out of this group, we have 90% oldest sons. Okay, will you grant me there's something going on here? There's a population that is selecting itself. Okay, number 2. In Dothan, Alabama, you have the first 100 males that you stop. Ask how many of them got Dean's List grades somewhere along the line. You might find 1 or 2. How many in this room had Dean's List or honor roll grades somewhere along the line? Would you raise your hands, please? Like, wow. Okay, we're hitting about 85% again. All right, number 3. In downtown Dothan, Alabama, how many males would you have to go through to find somebody who had a contact sport varsity letter? And I don't mean running track or chess. I mean where you play and beat the shit out of somebody else, one by one. How many of you have varsity letters in a contact sport, please? Very interesting. At least half of this room, you would go through many hundreds of people in downtown Dothan to find one. Okay, and I got my clincher. You would have to go through thousands of people downtown to find one Eagle Scout. How many Eagle Scouts are in this room? Would you raise your hands, please? We have 1. Okay, that in itself is unique. The last group of naval aviators I spoke to who were in A6 Squadron on the USS Constellation, there were 35 guys in the room. 20 were Eagle Scouts. I'm impacted that old Eagle Scouts gravitate to naval aviation. But whether they're in this room or not, the fact that we have one backs up what I'm saying. There is a unique club. We are the 10s on the scale that I want to talk about this afternoon. Those who work with you in your command, who may not be 10s, will possess all the things I'm going to talk about, but less perfectly. The reason it must be addressed is that it really doesn't matter how much has he got, whether it's a 5 or a 6 or a 10, but what he does have, can he orchestrate it? And that's what I'm going to show you this afternoon. Let's pretend we're talking about the Aviator, but you see we're talking about them all. I would find a great similarity between a valued coin, like a $20 gold piece or a silver dollar, and this person we're going to talk about. And the comparison is that we sort of take for granted that the coin has great value, and that it has a heads, which for some reason or other is good, and it has a tails, which for some reason or other is bad. But they coexist. What I want to show you is on the head side of the silver dollar that we're going to talk about, the professional, that there are 4 features that will coexist, that must be smoothly orchestrated. If they are at all flawed, the whole thing goes to hell. And that coexisting with these 4 features that are good, productive, and healthy, on the tail side of the coin are 4 other features which would tend to systematically denigrate this guy's performance. And what we have to do as leaders and commanders is to hype up that which is on the head side and protect him, preferably institutionally, from that which is on the tail side that wants to shoot him down. All right, what we're talking about then is this silver dollar. I find it remarkable, and I think maybe this is what bit Harry Reasoner, that this very neatly organized person that I'm going to talk about this afternoon, who is in every way a professional, would yet have you believe that he is represented by a picture, a photograph of Brian Donlevy and Errol Flynn as they appeared in the 1939 movie that I remember, The Dawn Patrol. Maybe you remember it too, Colonel. I remember seeing these 2 shit-hot cats in there, and the code talk from how they looked, how they acted, the words they chose, told me that here are 2 semi-alcoholic, skirt-chasing wild men who learned nothing from past mistakes, who gave not a shit about anybody else's rights, and thought it was neat to end up in a smoking hole, and did. Now, the sublime to the ridiculous is this. At the far left-hand end of the bar, at the Officers Club in the Marine Corps Air Station, Iwakuni, Japan, even as we are seated here this afternoon, there is a photo in a gold frame of Brian Donlevy and Errol Flynn from that picture. The ridiculous you will find in the Coast Guard Air Station in Mobile. outside the ops office, and some of you are nodding your heads, there is a big picture outside the ops office with little pictures in it of all the little coasties who drive the little coastie airplanes, and by God, they've all got leather helmets and goggles and a white scarf. Now tell me, the Coast Guard aviator is anything like what that image is. The point I'm making is this. The image projected by somebody who in fact is very much a professional has nothing to do with what he is. And he grooves on projecting a phony image, and you can get snookered if you just judge by the trappings. You know, I have to laugh at my son, who's 20 years old, and when he puts on Dad's flight jacket, he is a different person. And yet, when he takes the flight jacket off, it's just David Dully, that's all. But Dad's flight jacket's got, you know, patches and Tonkin Gulf Yacht Club and USS Enterprise and all this neat stuff. The trappings would tend to fool you. So let's then go ahead and zero in on what is not just the trappings, but what's the real? What's in the silver dollar? All right, what there are is 4 things that will be coexisting together. 1, and the most important, and everything follows from this one, this person is in control. Now you think about that. This is a controlling son of a bitch who likes being in control and is very uncomfortable if somebody else is. Will spend a lot of his energy to manipulate things so that he's the one that's in control, even if it's behind the scenes. We're going to talk about that in great detail in a second. Number 2, oh, by the way, I don't have any trouble selling him that that's an important feature. He likes that. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Number 2 comes as a surprise, and that is that the male-female interface of this guy is characterized by emotional distance, not intimacy. He does not know that. That turns out to be important for when he doesn't have his act together, and if somebody violates the distance that he would like to keep in there. We'll talk about that in a sec. Number 3, if his act is nicely orchestrated, he is a mission-oriented compartmentalizer who does not get distracted. He is so smooth at this that his wife will tell you, even though, yes, he's supposed to do that in important things, he does it all the time. You can't even distract the son of a bitch if he's just watching Dan Rather. And that is bad. Now, the 4th feature is that this controller, emotional distance compartmentalizer is systematic and methodical. He is a checklist freak, and he worships the god of no surprises. And if you want to discombobulate his life, throw a surprise at him, because then he knows who's not in control, and he isn't the man who makes things happen. All right, let's look at each of these individually. I don't know if it's true in Army aviation, but it is true in naval aviation that there are certain harbingers that will give you a dead giveaway of the naval aviator when he's not in his uniform. It used to be that he had a big Seiko watch. Now it's gotten that he has this black plastic thing with about 55 tiny buttons that his stubby finger can't punch only one at a time. That is the naval aviator. The second feature to tip you off as to who he is he's always trying to cash a check. And the third thing, oh, is that not unique to the, oh, good. Well, let's see if this one fits too, because the third feature of the naval aviator is a secret known only to his wife and his flight surgeon. And that is that he has a remarkably small crank. I see, very interesting, all right? Taking a look at Mr. Controller, there are some features that I look for in the controller who is in his glory, or in the youngster who is growing up to be one. We've already addressed, for instance, the oldest son. Now that turns out to be very important, and let me speak as a charter member of that club and see how much of this is familiar to you. The oldest son, living in the shadow of the great man, his father, seeks recognition from him he will never get unless he did something flawed. He'll hear about that one. If this youngster is going to survive living under this success orientation, then 2 things must happen that will propel him into aviation as a career. 1, he must seek an inordinately difficult task. And 2, he must do it very well. Those 2 things mark the successes that this youngster begins to set out on by the time he's probably, I'd say, 6th grade. His circle of friends is being limited to people who are also like him. And if they are not oldest sons actually chronologically, then they are the second son, and the oldest son is either an artist or a dirtbag. And second son ends up taking over. And he, in fact, is oldest son round 2. This little circle of friends, as they grow, find that there are neat vibes to be gotten that you can feel good about. You know, it's too bad the old man won't tell you that you did well, but wait a minute. I recall St. Thomas the Apostle School in West Hartford when I came home from Sister Mary Holywater's classroom, and I had a report card that had 9 A's and 1 B. Yeah, there's some smiles in the room. Guess what happened? I got a ration of shit for the B, and nobody saw the A's. That is SOP for the oldest son. I find a very curious corollary to be found in grown men. Like, for instance, the United States Navy is my surrogate father. Would anybody then be surprised that the little pieces of recognition that I have been given, you will never catch me without? Now, I mean, honest to God, what can I do with a little set of yellow metal wings? I mean, for Christ's sake, who's kidding? But you will not catch me without. And every tatter of ribbon to which I am entitled to wear, I wear with pride. Because the recognition for difficult tasks done well that I find I need is coming from a surrogate father. So that's naval aviation, Army aviation, people will gravitate towards it because the recognition is there and because the system itself will help the guy to produce and be a producer so he too can get little yellow or white metal wings. The controlling features that mark the successful aviator, let's in your mind's eye see him in his airplane. He's got a hand on a collective and a hand on the stick, and he's got feet on the pedals. And when he sets a certain control motion into those controls, that plane does just as much as for just as long as the controller wants it to happen. And when he takes those input out, it stops. Now that is Mr. Controller in his glory. That's easy. You will find the same type of manipulation and response in almost everything he's doing. And I offer as Exhibit A, if he is a father, how does he treat his children? He treats his kids the same way he treats his airplane. Measured input, measured response. Damn it! And that's what he expects. I find a neat, repetitive, cyclic, recurrent, over and over happening in the families of controllers that I'd like to recite for you that I dare say will not be something out of my house and strange to you. It is the fate of the family when the controlling father decides that this weekend there will be a drive from Pensacola to Houston, the 10-hour family trip that the family dreads. And how does the controller approach this task? The night before, he does all of his pre-flighting. He goes through the AAA maps. He knows the time of departure, the time of arrival. How far down Interstate 10 does he go? Where does he pick up Interstate 12? What do you do with Interstate 30 around Houston? What is the availability of gasoline? How about the detours on the road? How about speed traps? He's got this thing figured out to a gnat's ass. The fact that mother has a size 2 bladder is not his problem, and they are going to launch on time. And by the way, on time is always 0 dark 30, right? Okay, so what happens? Mr. Controller, at the appointed hour, is pacing around the car, and where the hell are these kids? So how does he handle this? When the kids finally assemble in the back seat, one swipe, 3 kids get one swipe, and everybody knows who's in control. It will be a good day. Now, if you were lucky enough to have it all work for you like that, then I say more power to you, because I let me tell you the same scenario in the same kind of a household that is probably more likely to happen. The night before, since you just got cable and there was an X-rated movie, you did not get to do your pre-flight planning. Yet you knew when the 0 dark 30 hour arrived that it was time for you to get up and be out at that car ready to go. And where is the goddamn family? Well, the light's not even on in the bathroom yet, Dad. Hang on. But what Mother does, as Father is out there pacing around the car, safety wired, pissed off, okay, Mother has a little bit of code talk. And she says to the troops, Daddy is in a bad mood. Everybody knows what that means. So when the children dutifully do assemble, and the swipe comes through the back seat, 3 heads duck, and nobody gets hit at all. And everybody knows that this is going to be a bad day. Daddy is in a bad mood, and it is going to be awful. Now, why do I recite that? Because you can extract a second yardstick out of that vignette for use by yourself, for personal use, or to somebody else who's doing this. When you find a controller who is in a bad mood, you have found somebody who thinks they should be in control and they're not. And if you can point that out to him, he can then make the decision as to whether all this bullshit is worth it or not. And sometimes it is. But that's a neat little key. You can defuse things with that. Controllers are comfortable with other controllers. We all play by the same rules. Were that not true, can you imagine the mayhem that would happen around an aircraft carrier with 95 airplanes in the sky at once? They don't smash each other up. We don't have mid-airs around carriers. We have mid-airs in our training fields, but not at the place where it's the most dangerous, because it is a nicely controlled situation. Controllers, depending on other controllers, always come through. The ready room is a collection of controllers. Within the spectrum of controllers, if you and I want to place ourselves healthily in the middle of this great spectrum from what they are, I'm going to show you what's at either end, both of which you'll recognize. At the far end, where somebody has gone bonkers in the business of control, is somebody who you will recognize in Army aviation in the training element. He's called the screamer. Now, the screamer is your instructor who thinks that he can put such control on his student as to get this enormous measure of performance. And it isn't going to happen. And he responds in decibels. This is a guy who has strapped on for himself the task of controlling that which he cannot control. And he goes apeshit because he can't do it. Now, that's to the far end of the spectrum. At the opposite end of the spectrum is somebody else who in fact is far more dangerous, and somebody who in your unit, don't waste your time with them, get rid of them. It's the narcissist. The narcissist, if you remember your high school mythology, Narcissus was a Greek god who fell in love with his image in a pond. That it was so perfect, it was without flaws, its magnificence overwhelmed him. You will find the modern day Narcissus in aviation as the person who you can never nail down as having been responsible for that which they in fact are responsible for. Somebody else is always there. They got stories this long with compound, complex sentences you couldn't diagram on a blackboard if you had to as to why it's not them. And there's the person who will not take control of that which in fact they are supposed to even minimally be involved in. And my advice, when you recognize them, unload them. You do not teach those people. One of the great tragedies that happens quite early to the growing, budding controller is to discover a feature built into himself that he cannot control. It's a dirty word for the controller, and the word is feelings. Feelings and control cannot coexist. You will either get one or you will get the other. He has learned this before he's out of junior high. Because he can tell you, as you can tell me, and we can tell each other, when you put your first full court press on a young honey in a training bra in junior high, what'd you get in return? you got track marks up your back. You discovered that for you to show your feelings involves risk, pain, it dissipates your energies, it parasitizes the very talents that you have to go do these neat missions that you'd like to go do. Well, how the hell are you going to have all that shit strapped on your back and be a successful controller? Because you're going to do one or the other. And you know what we do, don't you? We opt for control and unload the feelings. A very key, painful decision, usually made without conscious words as a youngster. And we will polish that son of a bitch until you're around age 40, which is the first time you'll decide that maybe that's not smooth. But between point A and point B, there will be emotional mayhem. If you grant me that there are lots of controllers, and that controllers are comfortable with other controllers, and that there are rules to be lived by that we all recognize, then you should not be surprised that controllers marry controllers. Oldest sons marry oldest daughters. And there is, in fact, a contest for domination as to who is in control. And in these houses, as you and I well know, there's going to have to be some kind of unwritten rule as to whose turn is it. There is a mentality in the civilian community that honestly believes that opposites attract, to where a strong, controlling person, namely you and me, will end up with a clinging vine. We'll end up with a clinging vine on a weekend, but not much more than that. We don't like that. We got to have somebody who can stand up toe-to-toe and give us the respect, and for us to respect them. Otherwise it doesn't fly. All right, then that leads me into the second feature. The controller is number one and the key to the whole existence here. Number two, as I said, that there is emotional distance. And I've already given you some clues as to where it comes from. But I can show you some more stuff. We as parents go to, I'd say, some fairly heroic extremes in order to get our sons to act masculine. The boy who clings to his parents is an embarrassment. And if my son's going to get recognition out of me, then God damn it, he better stand on his own 2 feet. And that does not mean hanging on mother's apron strings, and it does not mean showing me his dependency needs. It's not masculine. Big boys don't cry. All kind of this neat shit. There's all kind of society vibes coming at him to tell him that these feelings in there are not somehow acceptable. He finally figures out something that has meaning to himself, probably before he's out of high school, sometimes in college. But what he decides is a very tragic thing. And see if this has any meaning to you. That if you show somebody your feelings, you just gave them the handle with which to manipulate you. And all of a sudden the whole thing has turned sinister. It's really sour. Now, you going to have a controller and screw with that stuff at the same time? And the answer is you're not. Control the feelings. So how does he do that? Well, I'm not quite sure exactly what he does, but what I see happening is as if this person is to build a moat around himself. And this moat is deep and filled with sulfuric acid and snakes, and nobody comes across that moat unless you choose to put a bridge down. And you did in fact choose several times. A couple of times in high school, maybe once very tenuously in college, and then you cranked that son of a bitch up and threw the key away. Because you discovered if you let somebody come on your island, where your feelings are comfortably stashed off in the brambles and the prickers here behind you, somebody is tramping right through the middle of your feelings. Now wait a minute, this is my goddamn island. So an engineering miracle occurs. It has to, because society expects you to show intimacy. So what you do, you fix this island so that on call, you can shrink it or you can enlarge it. Now, all them other assholes are on the other side of the moat. And when you shrink your island, they think they're getting closer. but they are on your terms, getting closer. See, we're very good at that. We're so good. I mean, we are so socially adept. Look at us at a cocktail party and charm the shorts right off whoever wants to talk to us, you know. We are so smooth, we can show you the facade as if it was taken out of the pocket and show you the facial expression that is totally appropriate for whatever this story or terrible story or neat story is. And you're not involved at all. How do you do that? If you take a controller and put him in a position where his feelings will be exposed, well, then clearly one thing is going to happen. He's going to lose control. So number two, what does he do? If he is to retain control, then he must punch out. There are no alternatives. And the classic example is the controller comes to work about 20 minutes of 7 in the morning. He hits the breakfast table about 22 minutes after 6. And he knows he has 18 minutes to finish the paper, his coffee, and his cigarette, and then it's time to go to work. But the controller, because he's got his finger right on what the hell is going on, let's say this particular day comes into the kitchen and he's into the paper, and by God, not a word has been said, but he knows there is a curious frigidity in the kitchen this morning. You have committed some heinous crime. And she is mounting an assault right across that moat, and you can hear the horses. What do? Mr. Smooth puts his coffee cup on the table at 12 G's, kicks the chair out from behind, exits stage right, gets into his car 17 minutes early, and the problem is solved. He does not have to face the feelings that she in fact wishes to surface. She wants to punch his button that says spontaneous and see what comes out. And if he's going to retain control, he will not let that happen. By so doing, however, he runs the risk of, very generous misinterpretation as to where the hell he's coming from. I bet you've had the same experience I have in carrier deployments. Let me give it to you this way. I talked to the wife of an A7 driver in Lemoore, California, and we're talking about deployments and about all the feelings that there are around deployments, and how curious it is that those of us for whom deployment is our business, we never look at the feelings. That in fact, on one hand, is a certain sense of grief that I don't spend a hell of a lot of time looking at, because I'm leaving my castle, my chair, my home, the trappings, my I love me wall, those are all my plaques, my bed partner, my kids, my car, and I'm going to shit can it and trade it for haze, gray, and underway. And yet, I want to go. Now these two things contradict each other. So why is it that in the business that we're in, where deployment is part of it, and the guilt feelings because you bastard you want to go, and the part of you that says I don't want to go, why don't you ever share that with your wife? Man, that conversation would degenerate in 30 seconds flat, and we all know that. We ain't doing that shit. So what the wife of the A7 driver said, and you may recognize this, he deploys 3 weeks before the deployment, but he's in a goddamn living room. And what does she mean? She means that Mr. Smooth honestly believes that he is slowly and systematically removing his emotional irons from the fire in a way that nobody will know. That the feelings will never surface. They will not be visible. He will not have to deal with them. And the end result will be that there will be no tears on the ship. There will only be tears on the pier. A very remarkable phenomenon. And you see, were that not so, there'd be no ships. So it's a very well-practiced art that when the feelings are exposed, you remove yourself from the situation, or you squash them so slowly that you're not aware of them. There's a corollary to this that occurs post-deployment, and I'll bet you many of you have been here. About 21 days upon Father's return, Mother decides she'd like to have a talk. We have come to know that the talk and me is trouble. What she wants to do, she simply wants to tell you, what is it like that the only time children break arms falling from trees is when Dad deploys? Why is it that there's machinery in that garage guaranteed not for years, not for life, but forever, but when Dad goes, carburetors won't carb, pistons won't work, all kind of goddamn machines break. And that son of yours in that school, she has to go see the principal, and where the hell are you? She'd like to tell you what it's like. What is it like to construct an artificial environment that Dad was a viable, live, living part of, and now the bastard is gone, but will be back in 6 months? She'd like to tell you about that. Do you want to hear? Why not? It's getting much too close to the conflict that you have that you want to go. I mean, that's tough shit, lady. What am I supposed to do about that? Well, you can't tell her that. And if you did, then you're a bigger son of a bitch than I think you are. So the way you solve the problem is we don't have post-deployment talks. Because if we have a talk, we want to know what's wrong, what are the options, and the one I select is, and next problem. And that's a talk. Because if the talk gets into feelings, somebody's going to lose control. Okay, I say that my controller with this studied indifference to feelings is a mission-oriented compartmentalizer who does not get distracted. I give you as the classic example, let me take something out of naval aviation because it's more costly. One copy of an F-14 is 24 mil, and we give it to a 23-year-old lieutenant junior grade. We expect, you and me both, because we mortgaged that son of a bitch, we expect that when that canopy on that bird comes down, that it will exclude from his conscious all those things that do not have to do with the safe operation of that bird. So it will go do its mission and bring the son of a bitch back. And we want him to compartmentalize out that which is not F-14 related. And by God, he does, as a rule. If he doesn't, he may not bring it back because he needs to compartmentalize. You know, something you and I take for granted because we do it all the time. All the capabilities that God has given us that are resident in these neat and beautiful Adonis-like bodies we own, all of those capabilities are required to do the job that we're in. And when you just shave an edge off it, it isn't going to work. I expect those kids working for me, and you should expect for you, that the compartmentalization that they practice is perfect in the occupation that they're in. And if it's flawed, like how about a Dear John letter? You know, they didn't teach me about Dear John letters in med school, but I tell you I saw it on ship, just like you see it. And what's wrong with a Dear John? It defies compartmentalization. And the man cannot exclude the distraction that that provides. And that's what we want him to do. We want that bastard to polish up and to be ahead of the game, to know that compartmentalization is a trick that you must learn. Even the word compartmentalization is a useful tool for a kid who is struggling with his emotional conflicts, for you, the leader, to suggest to him that that should be compartmentalized out. You know, it's a word that explains. And I find it remarkable how well we do it. One of the reasons we don't have any trouble with the airplane is that we compartmentalize all day, every day, without regard for how important or unimportant is the mission. I'd like to show you some examples of the compartmentalization, some of it good and some of it not so good. You start your day with a compartment labeled S4. Shit, shower, shave, and shine. Now that's a mission. There's a way to do the mission, and we go to great pains to make sure that the mission is done correctly and fully. I'd like to point out to you that successful aviators do not worry about their bowels. Why not? Because when they start the day's compartment and enthrone, There is an allotted amount of time for that mission, which includes the first section of the paper, the editorial page, and the first section of the sports page. And when the time for the mission has been allotted expires, you abort the mission. It will appear on tomorrow's schedule. You don't worry about that shit. And when you get up from the throne, where do you go next? You do not go shower before you shave, do you? No, a good controller has got in his mind the correct order in which things should happen and how they will happen. He enters the compartment with the glass door, and you shower. How many ways are there to shower? Are you aware there's only one? If you are right-handed, where does the soap start? Every single time. You original son of a bitch. There is a way to perform the mission so that when you're through, you don't have to worry that you missed any place. Neither will you worry that you left soap someplace that you shouldn't have, lest you be scratching. Okay? And while you are performing this mission, you are not worried about the aborted mission that just occurred. That's over and done with. When you come out of the shower, you will dry off in the same order that you put the soap on, except you will have started with your face, and then you go to your left armpit. All right? When you're through with that, the next mission is to shave. There is a way to perform that mission. You open the mirrored cabinet, and you know right where that razor better be. And what does it mean if it's not? It means check for leg hairs, and you know that. Now I tell you, I get 16 shaves out of a track 2, and now I got leg hairs here. God damn it, how am I control my life? I can't even control my face. All right, now, how many ways are there to shave? Probably 2. Probably the same number as there are how many ways are there for you to mow your lawn. Allegedly, there's an infinite number of ways to mow all that grass, but you only do it one of 2 ways, and that's all there are. The same way you start here with the shave at the hairline, down 1 1/4 inches, back a quarter, careful on the corner, asshole. This is first, that's second, that's third, that's fourth, and this is last, unless you do not own one of these, in which case that's last. The end result of this meticulous ritual that you have set up is that the mission, shave, can be performed to perfection even when you are 53 years of age, have to have bifocals to see, and cannot shave with your glasses on. But you don't miss whiskers, Mr. Smooth. When you're through with your shave, you then finish up the last of the compartment, which is you shine your brass, your wings, your shoes, you put your uniform on, and you're ready to go to the next compartment. Have breakfast with family. Well, you know that's not the real mission, because you already saw what do you do if somebody violates the rules in that mission. It says, hold court. Because if somebody wants to do something you don't like, out you go. All right, third mission of the day, drive car to work. Nothing on your mind. No bowels, no whiskers, no soap in the scrotum, no fight at the breakfast table. Just them other assholes on your road. You know? Now here is a controller supremely in charge, and when he gets to work and he enters the in basket, out basket, he's not even worried about the flat tire he had on the way to work. And that's the way we expect him to do it. It has lots of spin-offs. We get so into the business of compartmentalization, and if your wife finds out that you have put her in a compartment, you are in deep shit. I'll give you the answer right now, and that is nobody said how big it was. That is the answer. The compartmentalization can be found in almost every single thing you do. Everything has its place, and there's a way for it to happen. Even things that don't have a place have a place. There is one compartment that's called and all others. That's so that things that don't match and don't fit have a place. Now let me show you a use for the and all others compartment, one peculiar to aviation and one peculiar to living. In aviation, when the pilot does a Delta Sierra and scares himself, something that ought to put him in touch with his mortality and let him know that he's not as shit hot as he would like to be, Why doesn't that modify his behavior? And the answer is the and all others compartment is at the ready to take this less than perfect egotistical occurrence, put it into the and all others compartment, and put the lid on it, and you don't have to look at it. It has the same impact that you would have if you're driving down the New Jersey Turnpike and you see a wrecked Buick. For the next 30 seconds, you'll drive carefully. And then you have dismissed it, because that's not you. You're too good. In the business of rotary wing flight, there is a compartment particularly dangerous by virtue of its label, or at least the label as perceived by the air crew involved. If the label says medevac, then you have implicitly given somebody a compartment that has no limitations and no rules. It is okay to violate everything known in a rotary wing community if you are worshiping on the altar of medevac. I'll show you one other. This is peculiar to Navy fixed wing. It's a phenomenon I've seen with every carrier deployment. The day before the carrier's deployment is complete, and the ship is about 350 miles away from its final home port, the carrier air wing, all 95 airplanes, flies off and they go to their various home ports on the coast. A phenomenon occurs on the ship on that day. If what I'm discussing here, the carrier air wing fly-off, is simply one additional evolution in a 9-month carrier deployment, then it would be no different than any other evolution that's happened the whole damn time, except that's not so. Because what we've got here is a compartment that appears to be labeled carrier air wing fly-off, which sounds, professional. That's not what it says. What it really says, and every aviator knows this, is get home. If that's the mission, you perform that mission differently. And that's what your safety officer will talk about with get home-itis. It is compartmentalization gone awry. If that's the compartment you're going to function in, and if get home is the mission, then you don't have to have rules, or training, or experience, or good judgment. To hell with it. The and all others compartment that I talked about a little while ago has one more utility. It has to do with those things that happen during deployment that would violate marital vows. Now, infidelity, as it occurs during deployments, can occur either with the deployed unit or, God help us, it can occur at home, you guys. Okay, we don't think much of that. But I would think that as a unit commander, you need to know that when those mistakes occur, that the cure for the guilt that may result is not the catharsis of truth. Now, you will be confronted with situations where your guys feel like, this is a terrible thing they've done, and we'll have a couple of bottles of wine and a good supper, and I'm going to do a dump-ex and unload this. And how much better I'll feel because I will have come clean and I've been honest. And hey, I want to tell you, that's the worst thing that can happen in a relationship between two people. Don't let it happen. Your guys need to know that if mistakes occur, the mistakes are left in the place that they occurred. What happens in Westpac stays in Westpac. And if he has to tell somebody, God damn it, go tell the XO, or go tell the flight surgeon, or tell the chaplain, but you do not tell the spouse. And if the spouse suspects, you better lie, boy. Okay, the last thing we're talking about on the head side of our silver dollar, our $20 gold piece, is that I said that this person is systematic and methodical, that he is a checklist freak, that he worships the God of no surprises. And in fact, we've just spent almost an hour pointing out how does he get this far? Because the controller is spinning his wheels to retain control so that the methods and the systems and the things that he's invented and concocted will work, and every time they work, he thinks he's that much more reinforced that he knows it'll work again. This is going to reach up and bite him, as I'll show you when we turn our coin over shortly. The business of no surprises for somebody who makes things happen is the sign that everything is going as it's supposed to. And that, in fact, is our goal. Now, before we take a break, I want to point out to you something that is probably the hardest lesson learned by people who have acquired these skills, namely, that the controller who is adept, who is able to maintain emotional distances in situations that appear to require intimacy, who is a mission-oriented compartmentalizer and does not get distracted from his missions, and who in fact does manage to make things happen without surprises, all of those 4 skills belong in the workplace and do not belong in the home. And he didn't figure that out. Okay, I'd like to take a 10-minute break and we'll come on back and pick up after it. Okay, let's pick up and turn this silver dollar over that we've just looked at the head side of the coin and seen all these neat things required for our occupation. Let's take a look at some of the built-in defects that lurk on the tail side of the coin and coexist and would tend to undo all of the good things on the head side of the coin would attempt to get done. These are things that institutionally there must be steps taken to protect this successful controller from. Let me first of all tell you what they are, and then we'll look at them. The first thing is that fighter pilots screaming to the contrary notwithstanding, we lack spontaneity. We really do, and we work hard at it. Number 2 is we are suckers for complacency because we're good. Number 3 is a trap that awaits us as we find rituals in order to get things done and finally find out that we've done the ritual and can't remember whether we did it or not, and I'll show you what's wrong with that. And the last thing is a very devastating thing that I want to finish up with, and that's a requirement that we all have for feedback from whatever the hell environment we're in that says we've got our shit together. And I can show you what happens when those vibes are not there. And the whole thing that we've just tried to put together comes unglued in a way which will deny your unit its effectiveness, and all it takes is one guy. Okay, let's look at the business of these defects. Spontaneity. Well, you may think you're spontaneous, but you can't be spontaneous and be a controller too, so you're going to get one or the other. Spontaneity is something that we as parents go to great pains to beat out of our children. We'd like some conformity. I don't want this uninhibited shit. I know what I want, and it's not spontaneity. Adult worlds are nicely controlled. They are not spontaneous. Now, I had 2 fascinating things happen to me in this business of talking to aviators about their spontaneity. One was the young wife of an H-3 helicopter pilot on the USS Kitty Hawk. And she said to me, well, Dr. Dully, my husband is so spontaneous right off the top of his head. He does these really wonderful things. And in my most tolerant clinical tones, I said, Madam, how long have you been married? 8 months. I see. I see. Well, dear, what you're looking at is naval aviation spontaneity, reel 1. You honestly think when he's through with reel 1, he's going to put on reel 2. There is no reel 2. And if you don't think so, ask any wife. She'll tell you it is the same old shit over and over. You original son of a bitch. Right. Spontaneity, my ass. Well, the other thing on the spontaneity kick came from VF-1. Now, VF-1 is the Navy's first fighter squadron. At the time was attached to the USS Ranger, and they were flying F-14s. And this Navy Lieutenant Commander, Ops Officer of VF-1 came unglued when in his ready room I failed to acknowledge the spontaneity in that gathering. And I reminded them, he says to me, well, Dr. Dully, have you never been to Miramar Naval Air Station on a Wednesday night? Isn't that the most spontaneous display of something? Well, I don't know if you've ever seen Miramar happy hour on a Wednesday night. But the answer is, not only is it not spontaneous, it is the classic naval aviation pre-programmed animal act requiring enormous amounts of lubricant just to get it off the ground. And they think that's spontaneous. We have an institution that perhaps you have too. In the plan of the day, a printed document for the unit, VF1, plan of the day, it says everything that's going to happen, what time you go to the bathroom, when payday is, you know what the flight schedule is, who's got the duty, what are the emergency phone numbers, and at the bottom of it, it will say the emergency question of the day. And it's something right out of the manual, and it is meant to keep everybody pre-programmed on occult stuff that they haven't looked at in a long time, so that they don't end up going spontaneous in the air. And one other institution that you probably have taken part in many times, hangar flying, a bull session with seniors and juniors. And you get two senior aviators in the front of the ready room, and they tell this magnificent story, and the JOs, the junior officers, are there listening. In effect, they're removing a cerebral IBM punch card to record this minutely detailed, wonderful scenario and its conclusion and what the options were, and file it for future reference. And then one day, he gets in a situation like that one. He's been there. We offer him vicarious, inexpensive experience, so he does not go spontaneous. Going back to what I told you about the carrier air-wing fly-off and the get-home-itis, get-home-itis puts an aviator into the spontaneous arena, and they screw it up. So it turns out those two match. Maybe you remember when you were younger a certain little so-called spontaneous gesture that was a manipulation on you by a female. Remember the way you used to bristle when somebody said to you on cue, "I love you," and you were supposed to respond, "I love you too." You know, God damn it, I'll tell you if I love you, and I'll tell you when I want to tell you. Don't you do that to me, you know. This is an attempt to make you be a spontaneous, nice person, and you're not. You're a bastard. Okay, the second problem, I says they were suckers for complacency. Well, prior to coming to my current duty station in Pensacola, I was attached to the carrier force of the Pacific Fleet. And among the tasks that I had was to go to every carrier ready room on every deployed carrier and give presentations not unlike this. And of course, spontaneity was one of the things we talked about, and complacency. And one of the things I used to say was the following lie. I would say, "Isn't it curious that they don't have any complacency in the training command in Pensacola? They only have it here on the Enterprise, where we're good." Well, I'm half right. But to think that there was no complacency in Pensacola is wrong, as I have discovered being the CO of NAMI, and I'll tell you where the hell it is. It's in the instructor community. What I should have said is there's no complacency among students. But if you're good enough to do what you're doing in a way that you're teaching somebody else, then you goddamn right you're good. And you can take certain amounts of pride. And you know, and your experience will reinforce what you say, that the proven system in the hands of a pro will not fail. And it does, with regularity. I would like to diverge for a second and show you a corollary to this business. I'm going to call it familiarity breeds contempt. I'm going to show you where your airplane is involved, and I'm going to show you where your spouse and your family are involved, except they're called different things, even though they are identical. Let's take a look at the airplane. For somebody who's been flying a particular airplane for a number of years, it will not take a mental giant to figure out that he can do a pre-flight with his eyes closed. You know exactly where the feet are supposed to track, what is supposed to be bent, kicked, touched, looked into, over, under, around, through, you've got it. And you can do this in a way that you didn't see nothing. The classic cerebral disconnect. You are now taking a machine for granted that at one time in your career you were hyper aware of its reputation that it ate people. When you get to where you have this complacency, and it's okay to do this cerebrally disconnected ritual, that's when you're most likely to get yourself burned. Let me show you what happens in the home with the precise same thing. I would ask you, please, go back in your mind's eye to the day that you were courting that chosen person. And try and remember, what was a full court press? Of what did it consist? It had a lot of things in it. Things that you very carefully discharged your duty towards. I mean, the choice of words, lest you were to give offense, gestures, little gentle touches, pull back the dining room chair, open the car door, neat little things. Be attentive in your lovemaking. Where did it go? Well, it probably went the same place that initial trainer that you used to fly years ago. It's off in a museum somewhere. You just sort of forgot it. I would like to show you the end result of complacency as it's found in the home. If you will please not forget that the end result of complacency as it's found in the workplace is the same except a slightly different scenario. In the home, it goes like this. I guess the best way to show you is to quote somebody. A shipmate of mine at the bar in Pearl Harbor says to me, and I quote, this took 2 planter's punches under his belt to get this out, "Doc, is it normal that after 10 years of marriage, the only time my wife and I ever touch is genital to genital, and that's all?" Now, that's not exactly his words. But can you imagine a more articulate epitaph on a marriage than a realization like that 10 years down the road, and with a couple of añejo punches under his belt, the light goes on? There is one tragedy that you and I have to work with that's in our homes that we can't control. It's called the plastic bag. Are you ready for this? The plastic bag is an anatomical variant found only in wives. This is an invisible structure into which is placed every hurt that ever transpired since the day she met you, you son of a bitch. They are all right there in this frigging enormous bag, ready for instant use. And she'll recite a date for you, and you say, shit, I don't know, I think I was deployed then. Now, the plastic bag is a concept, in addition to its humor, which has some neat utility, and I would offer you this before I finish up on the business about taking people for granted. All women have plastic bags. Downtown Dothan, Alabama, they have plastic bags. What is so unique about the plastic bag found in military aviation? Lots. You show me another occupation where inside that plastic bag is terror at the appearance of an official government vehicle in a civilian neighborhood. What does it mean? It means somebody died. That's our business. Can she talk to us about this? Not on my watch. What does she do with this? It goes in the bag. There are lots of things unique to this occupation. Cross countries. Why are they always on long weekends when the family was supposed to go somewhere? Where are you, you son of a bitch? Alameda. What's an Alameda? Oh, well, there are some things that don't have to go in the bag. And the utility of knowing there is one is it gives you the opportunity to figure out whether it's worth putting it in or not. Okay? Now let me show you with another example. A tragedy visited upon a family, a Navy family, where the plastic bag overfloweth. 18 years of marriage to a then Navy captain who had 13 carrier deployments under his belt as a fighter pilot. Now, somehow or other, there were 4 children in that marriage, which is remarkable. In that 18th year, that lady was an emotional wreck, and that is the loosest possible English. She was, in fact, getting very intense psychiatric care. Her husband, now follow this, her husband is up for orders. He is in a not very illustrious staff billet in a naval air station in the southeast. His choice, and he's offered the choice, is of 2 billets. One was to go to Miramar, Fighter Town, USA, to a job that all of us who knew him knew full well that's the last stop before he makes flag, okay? The last grooming ground. The alternative that he was offered was 1 more year at this not very illustrious staff, which, however, as we explained to him, would put him in immediate proximity to the treatment process that was going on with his wife, and if he would stay there and get involved in what we were trying to do, we thought we could put her shit back together. Let me tell you how this came about. We told the captain that if he went to Miramar, his wife was a permanent custodial psychiatric patient candidate. If, on the other hand, he stayed and got involved, it could work. And what he said was, and I quote, "What hospital would you recommend, Doc?" All right, now why do I tell you this? Well, that plus the story about my friend in Pearl Harbor in his 10th year of marriage are 2 terribly tragic examples of what happens when people take things for granted. You know what happens when you take your airplane for granted? It's going to reach up and bite you. And you and I understand that. But we sometimes don't remember that the people who are part of our lives are going to do the same goddamn thing. And here's my bottom line. If we were smart enough to periodically see where the hell are we and where is it going, in what direction is all this in my private life tracking, then you won't end up like my buddy at Pearl Harbor saying, "Holy shit, how did I get here?" If that's what you want to happen, so be it. But don't get surprised because you are such an adept controller that you don't see what's happening. That's the fate of the successful controller. He doesn't see. Okay, the third thing on the tail side of our coin, which has got a little humor in it, and we've sort of looked at it already, is the business about the trap of a ritual. Now, I've already showed you that you can do a pre-flight exam by ritual and see nothing, the cerebral disconnect. I would also point out another one to you, peculiar to aviation, and that is the ritual response that you are required to give when the little voice in the helmet says, "On course, on glide path, check wheels down and lock." Well, what do you tell them? Well, half of you guys, your gear is down and locked and it's welded, so it's okay for you. But some of us are fixed wing too. And it requires a ritual response which says 3 down and locked. But in the business that we're in, nobody said you have to look. They just said that's what you say when that's what he says. And that's what we do. Doesn't it strike you as peculiar how many gear up landings we have when less than 30 seconds before somebody just finished saying 3 down and locked, to be followed by, "Oh shit." For those of you who are fathers, and that rotten kid of yours sneezes, what does the good father say? God bless you. Well, if you want to see what a ritual has done to you, you recall that when that child was a rugrat and you were learning that that's what fathers were supposed to say, you were aware that that was your duty, so you said it. I would suggest that the next time the kid sneezes, don't say it. "You little shit, I ain't saying it." Now, are you aware how you are going to feel because you didn't do your ritual? Your arms are crossed and you aren't going to say it. You are a son of a bitch. Are you aware that because you don't say it, the cosmotelluric influences are not going to swallow up that little shit, although it probably ought to? Well, if that's true, then why do you feel so bad? Because you didn't do your ritual. The meaning has been lost, and the fact of ritual has taken over. When you left home this morning to come to work, did you give her a little micro peck, a little in-flight refueling? Bring a little light into her day, give her a kiss? When you first got married and when you walked out the door and you gave her a kiss and you said goodbye, it was a well thought out, deliberate act meant to say, you're neat, I like you. I will bet you that if you will think about this tomorrow, halfway to work, and ask yourself, did I? You won't know whether you did or not, you son of a bitch. That the ritual has taken over so that it can be done with a cerebral disconnect. And we like that because it's apparently controlled and it's a contrivance that we have come up with so that we make things happen and do things right. But as you see with the 3 down and locked, rituals can be traps. And they're a bad trap for controllers. All right, now the last thing to talk about is the role of maleness feedback. I say that all of us require feedback from all of the compartments of our lives. And what I'm going to show you is something that I think is common to all males. It'll vary in quantity from person to person, and it can vary from time to time in a given person. But there is a quantity of positive maleness feedback that you and I need. And we are going to get it. Now, if it's 7.5 cubic dullies per week, most of us, because of the control exerted in our lives and because it is nice and orderly, we have this little cerebral instrument up here, looks like an angle of attack indicator. And it's got red on one end of the scale and white in the middle and green on the other. And the angle of attack where this needle is supposed to be in the white. And you know, not infrequently it's in the green, and it don't get in the red, man. Because this angle of attack indicator tells me the amount of cubic dullies of positive maleness feedback that I'm getting. Now, we are very flexible in how you get what this minimum amount is. And you can, let me give you a for instance. Supposing you come to this squadron, and let's say you're not as high as you guys are right now, but the XO of the squadron, you have XOs of squadrons in the Army? So do we. The XO in this squadron is an asshole. This poor goddamn lieutenant is going to have to deal with a commander who right now is the most important person in his life. He writes his fit rep, he tells him what to do, and it's not working. For a guy in a situation occupationally such as this, that is going to be tremendously important negative maleness feedback, all right? We'll all concur with that. Okay, so what does he do? He will probably flail around trying to find manipulations to make this work situation more satisfactory, only to find that all the cards are in the XO's hand by virtue of who he is, and that you don't get anywhere with him. So what is he going to do to make up for the negative thing as the little cerebral instrument gets into the red? And he knows he better do something. Well, let me offer you this. See if you remember doing this. In the first year of your marriage, you exercise your marital privileges daily, at least. In the second year of your marriage, you exercised your marital privileges at a frequency approximately half of that. By the 5th year of your marriage, you have slipped into the fleet average, 1 per 5.1. And let's say in this 6th year of your marriage, and you run into this XO with the negative maleness feedback, guess what? Suddenly, in your home, you have reestablished the frequency of sexual intercourse that marked the first year. Now, what is she to do? She discreetly goes to the flight surgeon to inquire about the symptoms of a spinal cord tumor. Now, while you screw her brains out, You go to work every day with this negative maleness feedback, they more or less balance each other, and then the XO gets killed like everybody knew he would. And the problem goes away. He no longer needs the extra frequency, so he resumes the fleet average. She goes to the chaplain. Something terrible is going on. All right, now let's come back to what we do with it. This positive maleness feedback requirement is absolute. It is, however, variable in quantity, but it will always be filled to a certain comfortable amount. I would like to now go to the bottom line of my presentation and why I've been asked up here this afternoon to give you, as the commanders of today's Army, an entity when all of the things that we have spent an hour and a half talking about don't come together anymore, and it creates what I call the failing aviator. Now, the failing aviator will probably result from a failing marriage that has bitterness. Now, not all failing marriages have bitterness, but if they do, watch out. Because what's going to happen is you are going to have the demands of positive maleness feedback that will be inundated with negative maleness feedback that is born of the bitterness. And what you find is the controller in his own home is not in control. The situation is frankly out of control. The emotional distance that he has cultured ever so carefully ever since this relationship got off the ground has been totally violated to where, for instance, in the bedroom at night can be said, and I quote this one, "Well, that wasn't a very good try, maybe next month's try will be better." Now, that kind of shit violates any kind of emotional distance. Man, she is on your island. She has gone after a compartment of yours known as sexuality and taken that son of a bitch and thrown it on the public highway and cracked it wide open. And they're driving cars through it. And you know this. You feel like you need to cross your legs. That the compartmentalization that you had become pretty good at totally fails. This is the impact of a Dear John gone bananas. That when you're driving to work, you should be thinking of these other assholes on your road, you're hearing what happened in the bedroom. Or when the canopy on your F-14 comes down, it does not exclude. It's all trapped in there with you. And the blackboard of information in your head that's required to fly the airplane, 1/3 of it's already filled up with other shit. You've only got 2/3 left. Your compartmentalization is going to fail, and you are going to fail. For the person who does everything he can to avoid surprises, it's one goddamn surprise after the other. What does he do? He adopts a brand new, heretofore unseen behavior pattern, which amounts to a 7-piece checklist that I'm going to recite for you in a minute. That is the hallmark of the failing aviator. This is a guy who's had his shit together and suddenly is different. And the difference is this. 1. If he was not a smoker, become one. If he is one, smoke more. Or smoke funny cigarettes. Now, the cigarette thing I find a remarkable curiosity in the society in which we live, because if you look in this week's Time magazine and U.S. News and World Report, the camel man with some kind of boots on that look as though it's supposed to prevent him from snake bite is standing astraddle of a stream in a beautiful country setting with a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, and the code talk in that picture is what? Control. I mean, it's beautiful. You look at the cigarette ads. Look at the Vantage guy with the target in the middle of his face. Look at Mr. Marlboro on his horse with the cigarette in the corner of the mouth. It exudes power, masculinity, control, and everything organized. So this is a nice, easy step for the failing aviator, and Madison Avenue has already given the clue as to how to do it. It's the least expensive thing he can do. The second thing is going to cost him more money. It's booze. Now, booze, for the failing aviator, does several things and does them in peculiar ways. The first thing booze does is the one that's the most obvious, and that is it provides anesthesia, because this poor bastard hurts. The second thing booze does cascades on the first and is going to make it very dangerous. Because the second thing booze does is booze gives license. Now, if you wish to cavort in the nude in the officers' club in Fort Rucker, Alabama, you better be drunk. Because if you're sober, you're going to jail, asshole. All right, now given the license that the booze gives him, then find step number 3. He will have sold that staid old Chevrolet Impala and bought himself a snappy Porsche or a 280Z. We have a failing Aviator car here if you guys like to see one outside after this is over. Bob Mitchell can show you what one looks like. Now, Bob's not the failing Aviator, but that car, he takes a lot of flack for that car. The failing Aviator car is a sign, an outward sign to the world that, you know, you're with it. You're young, you're vibrant, you drive like a son of a bitch, and you drive drunk. And you will, if you're the failing Aviator, you shall crack up that car. And it will take less than 6 months for it to happen. Now, for some, and peculiarly, it's for the enlisted usually, their failing Aviator story stops right there because they don't survive the automobile accident. But for the officer, don't ask me why, it just is, oh, there's more things for him to do if he survives the accident, which he probably will. You can find him at a squadron beer bust on a Saturday afternoon playing softball. And he's the one that comes to the plate 3 sheets to the wind and hits a deep double into center field. He thunders around first base. The ball has not struck the ground yet, and he slides into second. Ass over tea kettle in a cloud of abandonment. And when he gets up, he has a broken arm. And the people that just watched this say, he just broke his arm. Now, wait a minute. That's not exactly right. He didn't go in there and break his arm. But what he did do was he slid into second base in a socially acceptable fashion such that if he were to be hurt, he could not be criticized. Now, you will see the same thing at the bar, this business of hidden punishment. I don't know if you guys in the Army have a dice game called Klondike, do you? Let me tell you about this terrible game, peculiarly found in Westpac usually, in Navy bars. It's a dice cup, 3 people. 1 roll of the dice cup containing 3 dice, and one of those 3 is instant pauper. And how they do this, I don't know, but it's usually C notes on the bar. And it's been my experience that either at QB Point in the PI or at the Naval Air Facility in Atsugi, Japan, I can expect to see a deployed failing Aviator drop big bucks on the bar, and there will be 2 guys, usually A3 drivers from Guam, who got their shit together, and in 1 roll, it's gone. And the failing Aviator has showed everybody the size of his balls by the amount of money he put out there. And just as he slid into second base to get hurt, so also did he play Klondike to lose. This also is the guy who will take up pastimes that require peculiar bravado that might be appropriate for the 18-year-old inveterate or youthful exuberant. But for a 35-year-old passed-over major who for the first time in his life is jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. You know, skydiving is for kids. And when somebody of a relatively advanced age starts doing kid stuff, it is for a reason. Now, the guy who at age 18 wouldn't get caught short on a Schwinn, and who at 36 is racing Kawasaki all of a sudden. Okay, this is purposeful, destructive behavior. It's not going to take the failing Aviator long to discover that the second to last thing on the checklist is broads. Now, he knows that since this trouble apparently started in the bedroom, the solution will be found in a bedroom. But the characteristic that makes it so unique is that the failing aviator is totally and deliberately indiscreet. He wishes to be seen as he trolls for things that are clearly beneath his social station and does so in a way calculated to bring him disrepute. And the best example I can give you that may not have as much meaning as perhaps it ought to is there's a bar in Pensacola called Trader John's. It's been there since the mid-40s. Trader John has topless dancers. The first time I ever laid my eyes firsthand on a failing aviator was in Trader John's. Trader's got these old barber chairs at the bar, and the honeys and all the other people watching, and they're off on the other side of the bar. And I'm sitting in my barber chair, and I watch a Navy lieutenant walk up to the stage, pick one of the honeys, walk out the center passageway for all to see, and out the door. You know, you and I wouldn't do that. If we were going to be damn fool enough to do it with her, well, I'm goddamn not going to do it in front of everybody else. I'll sneak around the back door. But this guy is indiscreet. He has to wave it at everybody. That's the way he does his sexual indiscretion bit. Now, the bottom line on the failing aviator is peculiar to his occupation, which is where he gets his name. He will fly dangerously. I'd like to say that again. He will fly dangerously because, I hope what you've been hearing between the lines and everything I've said today, a man flies as he lives. When his life is in order and he is in control, he is a good, reliable, and probably safe aviator. But when his personal life is in disarray and he is not in control, he may not be the safe aviator. Now, in the business of naval aviation with the tailhook, in 1980, almost 15% of our Class A accidents were caused by the failing aviator who was diagnosed post-accident. In 1984, 10% or so. What that means is that in the accident population, there is a peculiar proclivity for a certain type of guy who is predictable, and you should be able to spot him before he gets there. That's my point. Now, when you spot him and you see the checklist in action, what do? You do two things. One, you ground his ass, number one, and expect it's going to be 6 months for him to get his stuff back together. Number two, now this is going to sound oversimplified, but I'm here to tell you this is true. You tell him that his behavior is purposeful and destructive, and you want it stopped. And I'll tell you the response you're going to get. You're going to get a, holy shit. Just as you have listened to me this afternoon and you have realized that some of what I've said, I don't know you, but I know you. You know, I'm in your head. You will get the same response from the failing aviator when you get in his head, only he doesn't know that that's what he's doing, because if he is all the things we've just talked about, he wouldn't be goddamn doing it. He doesn't know he's doing it. So all you got to do is tell him. It may take twice. The only person who can't tell him is the spouse that's involved. Anybody else can. It doesn't have to be an officer, it doesn't have to be a male. I want to tell you a sea story that is true. Just as I have been watching your reaction as I tell you these things this afternoon, so also one afternoon in Iwakuni, Japan, talking to VMAAW 121, the Marine Corps A6 Squadron, one of the guys in that room got very antsy as I was telling the checklist of the failing aviator. And in the room, he was sitting about where you're sitting. And I'm watching this guy, and there's something going on. I am getting what I now have come to recognize. This is the first time it happened to me, but it's happened a lot since. The, quotes, studied boredom act. And what I was getting was, and I'm going out with my thing, and here this guy's This is totally inappropriate. It's out of place. And it finally dawns on me, what the hell is going on? I got one. Well, he didn't let me finish. I was about 3/4 of the way through the indiscretions that happen in bedrooms, and he came out of his chair and he shook his finger at me. This is a true story. And he says, just a minute, just a minute. Yes? So you a psychiatrist? I said, no, I'm a designated naval flight surgeon. Well, I just want everybody to know that. He crossed his arms and he sat down. So, being a hysteric myself, guess what I did? Nothing. And you know what happened? Every head in that room turned around to see, what does one look like? And the bottom line is this. As long as they're alive, they don't look any different. All right, now one more thing. And if you want, we'll open it up for questions afterwards, but I really can't stay too long. There's implicit in what I've talked about here certain things that you and I do as males in our private lives, which is pretty goddamn dumb. I've described all the things that we need to be successful in our occupation. And they make us terrible spouses. I have had occasion where certain aviators have heard what I said and thought to themselves that they've been doing it all wrong. They got to unscrew this thing and put it back together to be a better spouse. Well, may I leave a warning with you that if you do hear that implicit message in what we've talked about, then at least as far as you are concerned, there'll be nobody left to fly the AH-64. So I really haven't done you a favor at all, have I? Any questions? I will make one aside, and I know this is an intimidating subject that we've talked about this afternoon. I have come to expect that with male audiences, I'm not going to get any questions. You know why? Oh, there's one. But I want to tell you something. I have talked to, since about 1977 when I first began giving a variation on this talk, I've spoken to, I'll bet you, 25,000 naval aviators and 6,000 wives of aviators. And I have come to know that the male will not ask the question, but when I talk to a wives group, stand by. Because she will say, well, this asshole that I live with, ooh. I'm reminded of the wife of the XO of VA-146 and A-7's attack squadron in Lemoore, who he had heard me on the ship before the ship came in. The wives club then asked me up because all the husbands, hey, you got to hear this guy. He's really got it. And what the husbands think the wives are coming to hear is chapter and verse. This is what he is. Your compartment is this big and that high, and that's what those are your duties. Well, I don't change what I say for the wives. I tell them the same thing I told you. I try not to say the F word with limited success. But essentially, I tell them the same thing. But they hear different things. So here the 146 wife is sent to hear the captain. She sits in the audience. She hears. She comes home, and I found out about this the next day. Here's a true story. Himself is seated in the great overstuffed chair, waiting for her to come home. She walks in the door, sizes the whole thing up for what it is, and says, and I quote, "Hello, asshole." Okay, I got to go back to Pensacola. Thanks a lot.